It was a stormy Friday night in late October. The rain came down in relentless sheets, accompanied by the occasional boom of thunder that seemed to shake the walls of Mark's quiet suburban home. Mark, a man in his mid-30s, lived alone. He had settled into a comfortable evening, sipping tea and reading a book by the dim glow of a single lamp. Outside, the streetlights flickered uneasily, casting distorted shadows through his living room window. At 9:14 p.m., the power went out. Mark barely noticed at first, assuming it was a typical storm outage. He lit a couple of candles and placed them strategically around the house. The soft, flickering light gave the space an eerie charm, but the silence that accompanied the blackout felt oppressive. The usual hum of appliances and the gentle ticking of his clock were gone. The only sounds now were the pounding rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Settling back into his recliner, Mark grabbed his phone to check for updates from the local power company. His battery was at 80%, so he figured he had plenty of time. As he scrolled, a strange glow caught his attention. Across the street, one house remained lit despite the blackout. It was the Smiths' house, but the bright, steady light from their living room window didn't make sense. Mark knew the Smiths well enough to know they didn't have a generator. He stood by the window, squinting through the rain, trying to make out any movement. Suddenly, the light flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging the house into the same darkness as the rest of the neighborhood. Mark felt a chill run down his spine, but dismissed it. It's probably just some kind of electrical surge, he thought. But as he turned away, a faint scratching sound interrupted his thoughts. Mark looked up as a thick layer of cloud that had subsided. It was coming from the back door. Mark froze. He strained his ears, trying to discern the noise over the sound of the storm. The scratching was faint but deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. "Probably just a stray cat," he muttered to himself, though his voice betrayed his unease. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, he made his way cautiously to the back door. He shined the beam through the glass pane but saw nothing but rain-soaked darkness. The scratching stopped abruptly, as if whatever had been there knew it was being watched. Mark unlocked the door and opened it just a crack, peering out. The cold wind stung his face and the rain soaked the porch. He saw no animals, no person, nothing at all, except for a set of muddy footprints leading away from the door and disappearing into the backyard. Mark's heart began to race. The prints were human. He shut the door quickly, locked it, and double-checked all the other locks in the house. Feeling increasingly uneasy, he returned to the living room and glanced out the window again. The Smiths' house was completely dark now, but something else caught his attention. A faint, flickering light moving erratically in his backyard. It was a flashlight. Mark's pulse quickened as he watched the beam of light dance through the trees and shrubbery. It moved closer, stopping intermittently, as if whoever was holding it was searching for something or someone. He grabbed his phone to call the police, but when he pressed the power button, the screen stayed black. His phone, which had been at 80% just minutes ago, was now completely dead. Panic set in. Mark grabbed a kitchen knife and retreated to his bedroom, locking the door behind him. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening intently. For a few minutes, there was nothing but the sound of rain and distant thunder. Then, he heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps inside the house. Mark's blood ran cold. He knew he had locked the doors and windows. Whoever had entered must have found another way in. The footsteps moved slowly but purposefully, pausing every so often as if the intruder was listening for something. Mark held his breath, his grip tightening on the knife. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer to his bedroom. Then they stopped. The silence was deafening. Mark could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Suddenly, he heard the faint creak of the bedroom doorknob turning. "Who's there?" Mark demanded, his voice shaking. There was no response. The doorknob stopped moving, and the footsteps resumed, this time heading back toward the living room. Summoning every ounce of courage, Mark slowly unlocked the bedroom door and peeked out. The house was dark and eerily quiet. He tiptoed down the hallway, knife in hand, and entered the living room. What he saw made his stomach drop. On the dining table was a piece of paper smeared with mud. Scrawled across it were the words, "I've been watching." Mark backed away, his hands trembling. As he did, the power suddenly returned, flooding the room with light. He looked around frantically, but the intruder was gone. The doors were still locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. The muddy footprints, however, were very real, leading from the back door to the dining table and back out again. Mark immediately called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house and the yard but found no one. The footprints were washed away by the rain, and there was no evidence to suggest how the intruder had entered or exited. The officers reassured Mark that it was likely a prank and advised him to stay vigilant. But something about the incident didn't sit right with him. Oof. The next morning, Mark learned that the Smiths, whose house had inexplicably lit up during the blackout, were missing. Their home showed no signs of a struggle, and their car was still in the driveway. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For weeks, he avoided staying home alone, often crashing at a friend's place. But the sense of unease lingered, and he couldn't escape the memory of that stormy night. 1 month later, during another blackout, Mark was staying at a hotel when his phone buzzed with a single text message from an unknown number. The message read, "See you soon." Mark's blood ran cold. He stared at the screen, his mind racing with questions. Was it the same person? Were they still watching him? And most importantly, what would happen when they saw him again? Mark never got an answer, but one thing was certain: he would never feel safe in the dark again. It was a quiet Friday night when Alex, Jamie, Mia, and Ryan decided to hang out at an old house Alex was renting near their college. The house had seen better days. The paint peeled from the walls, the floors creaked with every step, and the basement, well, the basement was the kind of place you only went to when you absolutely had to. Still, the friends had shrugged off the house's eerie vibe, focusing on their plans for a relaxed evening of pizza, board games, and laughter. At around 9:30 p.m., just as they were deciding whether to switch to a scary movie, the power went out. The sudden darkness was jarring, the laughter stopped, and for a moment the only sounds were the faint hum of the wind outside and the shuffle of feet as the friends reached for their phones. Mia let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, who didn't pay the electric bill?" "Funny," Alex shot back, fumbling for his flashlight app. "The whole block's out." Ryan peeked out the window and confirmed Alex's observation. "Yep, street lights are out too. Must be the whole neighborhood." Jamie sighed. "Guess we're roughing it tonight. Anyone know where we can find some candles?" Alex scratched his head. I think there might be some in the basement. There's a box of random stuff down there. Haven't really gone through it." Mia groaned. "Do we have to? That place gives me the creeps." But with no better options, the group decided to brave the basement together. The basement was as unwelcoming as they had imagined. Dimly lit even during the day, it was now an abyss of darkness. The faint beam of their phone flashlights barely cut through the gloom, illuminating stacks of old boxes, cobwebs, and dusty furniture. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew. "All right," Ryan said, trying to sound upbeat, "let's find these candles and get out of here." As they began rummaging through the clutter, Alex paused. He thought he heard something, a faint whisper, so quiet it could have been the wind. He shook his head and kept searching. Alex groaned. A few moments later, Mia froze. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" Jamie asked, glancing up from the box he was opening. "It sounded like someone said my name," Mia replied, her voice trembling. The group exchanged uneasy glances. "It's just your imagination," Ryan said, though his tone lacked conviction. But then they all heard it. A faint, disembodied whisper, distinct and deliberate, floated through the darkness. "Mia." Mia's flashlight shook in her hand. "Okay, this isn't funny," she snapped. "Who's messing with me?" "We're all right here," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's probably just the wind." But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, and began calling out all their names. The friends huddled together, their flashlights darting around the room. But the source of the whispers remained elusive. Panic set in. "We need to get out of here," Mia said, her voice breaking. Merrick prayed. "What about the candles?" Jamie asked, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. "Forget the candles," Ryan shouted. "Let's go." As they turned to leave, they realized Jamie wasn't with them. "Jamie?" Alex called out, his voice echoing in the basement. There was no response. "It was right here," Mia said, tears welling in her eyes. "Where did he go?" The whispers grew louder, now mingled with faint laughter. It seemed to come from every direction at once. The friends shouted Jamie's name, their voices tinged with desperation, but the only answer was the unnerving sound of their own echoes. Oh, then they heard it. A blood-curdling scream from deeper within the basement. Without thinking, they rushed toward the sound, only to find nothing. Jamie was gone. In their frantic search, Mia tripped over an old, dust-covered chest. As she steadied herself, she noticed a tattered journal lying on top. Something about it felt wrong, but desperation overrode her fear. She opened it, her trembling hands flipping through its yellowed pages. "Guys," she said, her voice shaking, "you need to see this." The journal detailed events from decades ago. It described a blackout eerily similar to the one they were experiencing. According to the entries, the house had been the site of several disappearances, all during power outages. The victims had reportedly been lured into the basement by whispers that only they could hear. The final entry was chilling. "They come for you in the dark. Do not let them call your name." "We have to get out of here," Ryan said, his voice firm. "Now." They ran for the stairs, but the basement door was locked. No matter how hard they pushed or pulled, it wouldn't budge. The whispers were now deafening, mingling with guttural growls that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "What do we do?" Mia cried. Alex's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, and his blood ran cold. It was a text from Jamie's number. It read, "Come to. It's too late." As the entity's presence grew stronger, the friends noticed a faint glow emanating from an old kerosene lamp on a nearby shelf. Alex grabbed it, fumbling to light it with matches he found nearby. When the flame flickered to life, the whispers receded slightly. "It's the light," Alex realized. "It keeps them back." Using the lamp, they pushed through the basement, the shadows retreating before them. When they reached the door, Ryan used all his strength to ram it open. It finally gave way, and the group stumbled into the safety of the rain-soaked night. They called the police, but no trace of Jamie was ever found. The officers dismissed their story, chalking it up to hysteria and the house's decrepit state. But the friends knew the truth. Weeks later, Mia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One night, she received a voicemail from an unknown number. The message was barely audible, but she recognized the voice. It was Jamie, and he was whispering, "Don't come back." It was a night like any other in the heart of the city. Cars honked below, streetlights buzzed faintly, and the hum of television seeped through thin apartment walls. Daniel had just finished a late dinner and settled on his couch to scroll aimlessly on his phone. That's when it happened. Without warning, the city plunged into total darkness. The blackout wasn't entirely unusual. The city's power grid wasn't perfect, and Daniel had experienced outages before, but something about this one felt different. He peered out of his fifth-floor window, expecting to see the usual glow of headlights and flashlights as people adjusted to the outage. Instead, he saw nothing, not a single light, not even the faint glow of the moon. It was as if the darkness had swallowed the entire block. Moments later, Daniel noticed something stranger. One of the streets that had been visible just minutes ago was gone. Not obscured by darkness, but entirely gone. Buildings that had stood there were no longer visible, replaced by an endless void. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of the shadows, but as he squinted into the abyss, he realized it wasn't his imagination. "What the hell?" he whispered to himself. Then, the first scream pierced the air. It came from somewhere across the street. A woman's voice, shrill and terrified, echoed through the silence. Daniel's chest tightened as he stared into the void where the scream had originated. Moments later, the scream was abruptly cut off, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. That's when the building across from his began to disappear, one floor at a time, as though an invisible hand were erasing it from existence. The process was silent, almost surgical. Daniel backed away from his window, heart pounding. He grabbed his phone and tried to call someone, anyone, but the screen was unresponsive, flickering once before going completely black. Panic set in as he realized he had no way to contact the outside world. He paced his small apartment, debating whether to leave or stay put. Then came the noises in the hallway. It started as a faint shuffling, like someone dragging their feet. Then came the whispers, low, guttural voices speaking a language Daniel couldn't understand. He pressed his ear to the door, trying to make sense of the sounds. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, followed by another scream. This time, it was closer. A neighbor, perhaps one of the young couples down the hall. Daniel's instincts told him to stay inside, but curiosity got the better of him. He cracked his door open just enough to peek into the hallway. What he saw made his blood run cold. Oh. The hallway lights, which should have been dim emergency fluorescents, were gone. Not broken, gone. A pitch-black void stretched down the corridor. Doors to other apartments stood ajar, some swinging slowly as though recently opened, and on a few doors he noticed strange chalk-drawn symbols. Intricate patterns of circles and lines, almost like runes. He had never seen them before. As he stepped into the hallway, he called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response. Only the whispers. They seemed to grow louder, surrounding him, yet he saw no one. He approached the nearest door marked with a symbol and pushed it open. The apartment inside was empty, its furniture coated in a thin layer of dust. On the coffee table, he noticed a journal. Hesitant but desperate for answers, Daniel picked it up and began to read. The entries were dated years ago, detailing a phenomenon that sounded disturbingly familiar: blackouts, disappearing streets, and strange symbols drawn to keep them at bay. The author described them as entities that thrived in darkness, consuming everything in their path. The symbols, the journal explained, were a form of protection, warding off the entities as long as they remained intact. Daniel's hands shook as he read the final entry. "They come for you in the dark. Do not let them call your name. A chill ran down his spine. As if on cue, he heard his name whispered from the darkness. Daniel. He dropped the journal and stumbled back into the hallway. The void was closer now, creeping toward him like a living thing. Panic took over as he sprinted to his apartment. He slammed the door shut and locked it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He grabbed a piece of chalk he'd found in the journal and began replicating the symbols on his door. His hands were unsteady, and the lines came out jagged, but he hoped it was enough. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They called his name over and over, each repetition more distorted than the last. Daniel pressed his back against the door, clutching a flashlight he had found in his kitchen drawer. When he turned it on, the beam cut through the darkness, but it didn't reach far. The void seemed to absorb the light, leaving only a small circle of visibility around him. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt meaningless in the oppressive darkness. Just as Daniel began to think the symbols were working, the whispers stopped. The silence was worse. He realized he could hear faint footsteps outside his door, moving closer. He clenched his flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. Suddenly the door rattled as something banged against it. The symbols on the door began to glow faintly, as if resisting whatever was on the other side. Daniel's heart raced as he grabbed a mirror from his bathroom, placing it near the door to reflect the light from his flashlight. The glowing symbols grew brighter, and the banging stopped. For a moment it seemed like the danger had passed, but then he heard it again. His name, whispered from inside the apartment. "What?" he asked, his words startling him. Spinning around, Daniel shone his flashlight toward the source of the sound. The beam illuminated the corner of his living room, where a figure stood, its face obscured by shadows. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It only stared. Daniel bolted for the fire escape. He didn't care about the journal, the symbols, or the whispers anymore. Survival was his only thought. Climbing out the window, he descended the fire escape as fast as he could, the metal groaning under his weight. When he reached the alley below, he realized the void was spreading faster now. Entire buildings vanished before his eyes, leaving nothing but darkness in their wake. He ran, zigzagging through the city's labyrinthine streets. Occasionally, he saw faint lights in the distance, but they disappeared before he could reach them. He remembered the journal mentioning a safe zone, a place where the entities couldn't reach. He clung to that hope, though the directions to the safe zone had been incomplete. Finally, Daniel reached the edge of the city. The darkness loomed before him like a living wall, pulsating and writhing. In the distance, he saw a faint light flickering. Was it the safe zone? Or just another trap? He hesitated, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Behind him, the void crept closer, devouring everything in its path. The whispers returned, louder than ever, calling his name in unison. With no other choice, Daniel stepped toward the light. The story ends there, leaving his fate unknown, swallowed by the uncertain glow of the vanishing lights.